Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2. Testing, testing. Please let me know what if the connection is good. Quantum woo versus, I assume, was the intended. It was quantum woo versus quantum true. I don't know if I can fix that. But it should be good. Let me know if that's what it is, because that's what it's supposed to be. I can see and hear you. Good. That is good, because my connection looks a little odd. But please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. I think that this should be, a fun stream tonight. And we're still, working on exactly what time we're going to be getting started on these. But, like I've said, when you have an infant running on their time, and, So today I want to talk about a video that was put out by Professor Dave Explains YouTube channel. He is a science communicator, and I don't entirely disagree with a lot of things that he says, but we have our disagreements. And he has engaged in debates that we kind of have covered in the past, I believe, with people from the Discovery Institute, and maybe we'll talk a bit about that, tonight. But basically, the stream that we're going to discuss mostly is called "Quantum Mysticism is Stupid." Deepok Chopra, Spirit Science, Actualize.org. So basically, he's calling them all just stupid. And but we're going to go over all of this. But please hit the like button, and we'll start getting started pretty soon. So Professor Dave Explains YouTube channel is very large. This is, and I feel like it was not this big until very recently on it, but I might be wrong about that. But it is a wealth of information. There is so much on here. It's very impressive, actually, how much stuff is on here. But I think that what really has gotten a lot of people to this page is his ongoing debates and arguments with people from the Discovery Institute, like James Tour, about the science of life and God and religion and things like that. So we've covered a bit of it. And this is the stream that we are going to be discussing tonight. Right here. Quantum Mysticism is Stupid. Deepak Chopra, Spirit Science, and Actualize.org. And I will just say, very, very intelligent guy, Dave. But there are so many times that I have started writing a tweet in response to something that he has written on Twitter, and then just deleted it before I click post, because I just realized that it was useless to actually, click post. Twitter is a terrible medium of communication. It is one where everything is done for the sake of everyone watching, instead of for the sake of an honest discussion with anyone. And everybody I've noticed acts their worst on Twitter. So I try not to judge anybody by the way that they go about handling things on Twitter. But Dave definitely takes a very different approach than I would, or than I do now, at least. So we're going to discuss this, though. And as you know, on this channel, if you follow my work with sentient singularity theory, there are a lot of implications regarding sentient singularity theory that are thought of by most in the mainstream scientific academic community as pseudo-science or woo, these derogatory labels. But if you're following the cutting edge discussions that are going on with people on who are on a lot of the streams that we reference on this channel, like those who go on Kirchai Mungel's channel or those who go on Brian Keating's channel, which Dave has gone on Brian Keating's channel to discuss this type of thing before, of how do we go about engaging in the scientific community, and especially those with theological beliefs. And but if you follow those discussions that are happening, you know that a lot is starting to lean towards the idea that consciousness is more fundamental than what we would describe as materialism. It doesn't mean that materialism is fake. It means that it is emergent from a more fundamental construct that is responsible for the observation of materialism, of matter, and that's an idea that has been around for forever, literally. It is, you could say, the theological perspective, and it's been part of philosophical discussions forever. It has entered into the scientific discussion again because of ideas like the simulation hypothesis starting to gain popularity over the recent years. And this idea definitely faces an uphill battle, and we're going to talk about it in here. But so before we get started with that, I definitely want to say that there are two discussions that I highly recommend checking out. Brian Keating recently did another stream with Stephen Wolfram, and I think that is a very good one. I highly suggest checking it out. It's on his YouTube channel. And then Kirchai Mungel did a stream with Chiara Marletto, I think is how you pronounce her name. She's one of the leading researchers on constructor theory, and that was very good. I know that was a guest that he had been planning to have on there for quite some time, and constructor theory is a fascinating concept and theory, I guess you could call it, but it's one that's genuinely different, and we've discussed it a few times. That doesn't mean I agree with everything that it says, but it's highly praiseworthy just for its uniqueness, I think, right now in this space. So I definitely highly recommend going and checking that out. We might do a stream on that, probably will actually in the coming weeks, but for now I think it's worth watching the entire thing even before that. But next thing, I just want to share this. Many of you know, I recently had my first child, and she is keeping me awake many nights and also messing with my schedule a bit, so I apologize for the schedule being wonky, but just going to share some amazing clips because she has learned what smile means. And she's kind of become just fascinating to study the mind and then watch a human being be born and then start to develop and understand their world. But
Juliana, can you smile? Yeah, good job. Juliana, can you smile? Yeah, good job.
It's just amazing. There's a little human mind in there that is just, we think of babies as not knowing what's going on. That's definitely not true. We're gonna do even more streams on just learning as time goes on, and I just learn more about her learning, and but it's been fascinating that even a baby that is not even 2 months old can understand what the word smile means is amazing. And I have many clips of her doing that. It's not just that one clip. So it's not like she smiled at me just talking to her. She knows exactly what it means. I think it is I mean, she knows what I'm sure a number of words mean at this point, but it is the first word that we can definitely tell that she knows what it means, because if I ask her to do it, then she does it. And that's just been amazing. But so I thought that was interesting. Milestone of just learning how to understand and then interact and act. And that is the first word or verb that she seems to be able to understand, and we can understand that she understands, if that makes sense. So I thought that was cute. But like I said, please hit the like button, and we will get started. So just to go over who Professor Dave, I hate calling people professor, to be quite honest. I just think that I don't know if he has a real PhD or not, but I think that it's just gatekeeping, and in a way that I think is not necessary. But says his career included a full-time position teaching chemistry, biology, and physics at a private school in Hollywood, and substitute teaching in the San Francisco Bay Area before transitioning to lecturing at a trade university. I don't know if he actually has a degree or not. Let me see. Maybe he has this. Or a higher degree. Says he recorded his organic chemistry lectures, which would later become the first videos on his YouTube channel. Guys, OChem was the first class I ever failed. Ever. And so, maybe I should watch his videos on that. But this is without the stream that we're going to discuss. First clip. This is what his definition of quantum mysticism.
Excellent question. It's challenging to encapsulate this phenomenon in a sentence, but I believe I can do it fairly well. The essence of quantum mysticism goes like this. Quantum physics is confusing, so it's magic. Therefore, if magic can be framed using the terminology of quantum physics, that magic is real. You see, quantum theory, from the perspective of the public, is shrouded in mystery. It is typically spoken about in an almost mystic tone, as though it were akin to the occult. This is largely due to the fact that it is very hard to understand. True comprehension is reserved for physicists and mathematicians who can solve complex equations, as the power of this theory lies exclusively in the math itself. Everyone else must be satisfied with hollow, often misleading conceptual explanations, and that is indeed the way this topic is typically explained to the masses, who demand explanations under the false assumption that this area of science must somehow be immediately and fully transparent to them. For whatever reason, people tend to be interested only in the frontier of scientific fields. So instead of wanting to learn about Newton's laws, which they would have a solid chance of understanding with some competence in basic high school algebra, they want to talk about things like quantum mechanics, which most of us have zero chance of fundamentally comprehending, given the lack of prerequisite knowledge faced by anyone without at least a bachelor's degree in physics. When media outlets attempt to satiate this desire to commune with the boundary between the known and unknown, they take lots of liberties and make lots of mistakes, and the public brings a lot of baggage to the table. Even with seemingly professional pseudo-documentaries like What the Bleep Do We Know, the concepts are sorely misrepresented, and the viewer walks away with a false sense of comprehension, or worse still, a head full of lies.
Okay, so one of the things that I think is important to get out of the way before we go even deeper into this, and is that it is important to assume that anyone that you are discussing anything with is telling the truth. Okay, and this is kind of a very important prerequisite. I don't normally like to discuss like criticism, and I like to discuss things that I think are productive, and not things that I think are destructive. Even though in this case we're going to talk about this video, which is really an attempt at being destructive. It is. I mean, it might state that it is an attempt at being constructive, but it is an attempt to be destructive to those he thinks are destructive. So at least he'd probably agree with that. I'm trying to be as honest as and just guess, grace giving as possible. But here's the thing that's really important is that if you think somebody is a liar, which lies are not things that are false. Lies are things that are intentionally false. Okay? That is what lies are. Then you must not engage with them at all in the first place. It's not worth it to engage with people who you think are genuinely liars. Unless you have some type of ulterior motive, potentially, whatever it is. But that isn't, it's not direct. It's an indirect motive. Maybe it's to, I don't know, be entertaining and get an audience or something like that. But if you genuinely think that someone is lying, then you really should try and avoid engaging with them in the first place, because it's just a waste of your time, like I said, unless you're using it for some other motive. But if you are, then I almost regard that as, it's almost dishonest in itself, but maybe not necessarily. I don't know, I need to think more about it. But it's just not a good use of time. It's not productive in the way that it's not truly productive. Gaining an audience is not in and of itself productive. And that's something that I've struggled with, wrestling with on this channel, is like, do I go and just pursue views, really? And that really, it's not something that I have ever tried to do, but it is definitely something that is always on the back of your mind if you have a YouTube channel and you see how people are doing things on YouTube, and it's very common for people to just be pursuing an audience. And but it's just important to assume that people are being honest if you're really going to engage with them in any kind of rigorous sense, especially. So he definitely calls a lot of people liars, and says that a lot of the things that that people are told about science are lies. And maybe he's using the term differently than me, but I'm using the term to mean it is something that is intentionally dishonest. It's not something that is unintentionally dishonest. It's not just something that is wrong. And I don't know exactly what he thinks about it, but I mean, he did speak quite a bit about this with Brian Keating, and I respect Brian quite a bit for and Dave for having that discussion. I don't know how much progress they made, to be honest, but I think that it is an important one to have. Is what is pseudoscience? What does it mean to be lying to the public about things like quantum mechanics and things like that? So I don't know how much it's true to call these things lies, but definitely there's a lot of misleading things that are said to the public, especially regarding quantum mechanics. And I will even say that, even though people would say that I probably do that, but I don't think that I do that. If I'm telling you guys something, it's because I genuinely believe that it's true. And if I didn't believe that it was true, I wouldn't tell you. And I hope that you believe that. And if you don't, then please watch another channel. Don't waste your time. But I obviously have a huge issue with the term pseudoscience. But if we look up the term mysticism, the definition is belief. Where is this? Mysticism, belief characterized by self-delusion or dreamy confusion of thought, especially when based on the assumption of occult qualities or mysterious agencies. What does that even mean? What does that means nothing. To say that, and to say that something is self-delusion, again, you shouldn't engage with it if you think that somebody is truly, like, completely nuts. But to call something just purely self-delusion, or to define it as such, is it's not. If you're going to define it as that, then you shouldn't engage with it. So here's my example. This is kind of tough to explain, because I know that there's so many different definitions that people use and are coming to this topic with, their own assumptions. So I'm trying to make sure that we all are on the same page as far as what certain words mean. But once I was having a discussion in a Discord, probably later last year, and somebody asked if I believed in the what is it called, the paranormal. Okay, and I said, well, what does that mean, the paranormal? What do you think that? How are you using that term? And they were like, well, how do you use the term? And I said, it doesn't matter how I use the term. It matters how you use the term, because you asked me the question. So you tell me how you're using the term, and I'll tell you whether or not, what the answer is to that question in it, utilizing your definition for the term. And they were not happy about that. They thought that I was trying to basically weasel my way out of the topic. And I asked them, does paranormal can mean one of two things? It can either mean things that are beyond our current understanding but are true, or it can mean something that is not true and does not exist. And so does it mean something that does exist truly but is not yet understood, or does it mean something that does not exist? And they basically said to me that it means something that does not exist. And I said, okay, well, with that definition, then no, I don't believe in the paranormal. I don't believe in that which does not exist. And they were not happy about that, because they thought that it was me being manipulative. But that's not at all actually true. The question itself is manipulative. I don't think that they were consciously trying to manipulate me, but that would almost be like too sophisticated for that discussion. But it's just a misunderstanding in the fundamental criticalities of that exchange, in which I cannot sensibly ever say that I believe in that which does not exist by my own definition. That's just insane. So it's important that when we define these terms, or we use these terms, we're using them in an affirmative manner, I guess you could say. So to say that something is mysticism, if we're going to go by this definition, which is coming up on Google, belief characterized by self-delusion or dreamy confusion of thought, especially when based on the assumption of occult qualities or mysterious agencies. That literally means nothing, guys. It's just important to recognize that is just a word salad. It doesn't mean anything. It just is it's just a term that is basically, it's being defined as something that is stupid or ridiculous or non-existent. But if we click on Wikipedia, say, mysticism is popularly known as becoming one with God or the absolute, but may refer to any kind of ecstasy or altered state of consciousness which is given a religious or spiritual meaning. I don't even like the term spiritual. I don't know what that really... I get what people mean when they use it, but I think that it's... everything is spiritual. Or nothing is. It just depends on how you define it, which makes it a useless word. It also may refer to the attainment of insight or ultimate or hidden truths, and to human transformation supported by various practices and experiences. So basically it's, spiritual, quote unquote, practices without religion, almost, is what it seems like they're basically saying. But I don't know exactly if that is a good term for it. It's here below that it says the term mysticism has ancient Greek origins, which various historically determined meanings derived from the Greek word mu, which meaning to close or to conceal. Mysticism referred to the biblical liturgical, spiritual or contemplative dimensions of early and medieval Christianity. So it's basically like the metaphysics of, it's just metaphysics, really, of consciousness. And maybe you could say that it's very often linked to religion and meaning, but it's a hard thing to define, and I think that it's an important thing to define. If you're going to attack it, then it's an important thing to define. But or to call something a pseudo-documentary from 2004, I don't know what the documentary was, but to call things pseudo-science, pseudo-documentary, mysticism, it depends on what you're specifically stating. But if people are being honest about what they believe, even if they're wrong, then it's not pseudo anything. And if they are being dishonest, then it's just lies, and in which case don't engage. But next clip. This is something that I think was interesting, because I will say this: when it comes
can lead people to
when it comes to this guy particularly, Dave explains. I guess his name is, I don't want to botch it. Dave Farina, I think. Yeah, Dave Farina. I think that's pronounced properly. But I have to hold back myself quite a bit, because my instinct is to go, I disagree, because I disagree with a lot of the overarching conclusions that he comes to. And I used to agree with him very much, when I was a self-described atheist, but I would actually now call myself an anti-theist at the time. And but at the same time, when I really dig into what he's saying, a lot of times I actually don't disagree with what he's saying as much. And I think that there's a lot more nuance in the things that he says very often, if you can get past, some of the brashness. But this is him talking about energy.
Much like other scams and pseudoscience, it all stems from a misunderstanding of basic scientific concepts and terminology. In this case, it is the word energy. What is energy? Even just hearing that word out loud, dozens of connotations probably come to mind. Here is the way quantum mystics on the internet use the word incorrectly.
They talk about something called spirit, an energy, and an invisible force that seems to be controlling who and what we really are. Quantum physics emphasizes that the universe is not really split into two realms, a material realm and an energetic realm. Quantum physics reveals that everything is made out of energy. What we perceive as matter is actually an illusion of energy and light, that there is nothing physical.
So as you can see, to the quantum mystic, energy is a synonym for magic. It means whatever they want it to mean in order to sell to the suggestible viewer whatever it is that they're selling. But in science, this word has a very specific definition, which we must learn now. For maximum effect, please purge yourself of every connotation you are aware of for the word energy, as the term has been completely convoluted by society, so we need to start from a blank slate. Act as if you've never heard this word before. Are you ready? Here it comes. Energy is the capacity to do work. The end. Now, to further clarify, we should also define work. Again, in society, this word means many things. It can refer to a profession, an action, or even a location. So let's again purge ourselves of these connotations so that we can learn what it means in science. Work refers to an action done on an object whereby an applied force causes a displacement of that object. So work is about motion. When you apply a force to an object and it moves, like pushing a box across the floor, you're doing work. So energy is the capacity to do work, which is what causes motion. And that's all there is to it. Energy is a property of a system and nothing more. To elucidate further still, we could highlight different forms of energy. Kinetic energy is the energy an object possesses by virtue of its motion, which can be transferred to other objects through collisions. Potential energy is the energy an object possesses by virtue of its position in a field. Lifting an object into the air increases its gravitational potential energy, which is then converted into kinetic energy as it falls, just the way a compressed spring has a lot of potential energy, which is released as it expands. Thermal energy, or heat, is just a transfer of kinetic energy, and temperature is a measure of the average kinetic energy of the particles in a system. Hotter systems of particles are moving faster on average, colder systems of particles are moving slower on average. Chemical energy is a kind of potential energy which describes the potential of some molecule to undergo a particular chemical reaction, which is simply a rearrangement of atoms. All of the above is explained in far greater detail over in my classical physics playlist, should you wish to learn about these concepts. Finally, matter itself is a form of energy. According to the most famous equation of all time, Einstein's E equals mc squared. E is energy, m is mass, and c is the speed of light, which is a big number, and when squared is an even bigger number. So matter times this big number equals lots of energy. But even this form of energy is not mystical in any way. When matter is converted to energy in a fusion reactor or a nuclear bomb, it is still the same phenomenon we have been describing. It can be defined rigorously and measured quantitatively, so even in this abstract context, it is never ill-defined or vague. So you see, when we say everything is energy, it's actually a true statement because matter is a form of energy. But this does not mean that there is a magical spiritual world. It does not mean you can heal yourself with your mind or any of the other bogus claims we will investigate in a moment. And is not an object. It is not a substance. It is not an essence or a life force or a magical realm. It is a property of an object or system that can be transferred into another object or system, typically in the form of work.
Okay, so I actually agree with that. That's not wrong. And even in the context of sentient singularity theory, when you're thinking about even the creation of the cosmos from the initial sentient existence, and I talk about how 1/3 of God's energy has to be put into creation or the cosmos that is being created in order to create a mathematically stable structure, then it still applies to this definition still applies of energy is a property of an object or system that can be transferred into another object or system, typically in the form of work. And so a lot of this has to do with the fact that we have multiple definitions for the same word. When we say, and he gets into this, this room has a good energy, or I like the energy of this, then that isn't really an incorrect use of the term. It's just a different use of the term than speaking on a less metaphorical and a more literal, in a more literal manner. But the issue that I have with what he's saying, even though I agree with his definition here, and it's important that I'm trying to highlight where I agree, because there's a lot of nuance in a lot of the things that he does, and I think that even the definitions that he uses many times and his criticisms of even the people at Stephen Meyer and those and James Torr at the Discovery Institute, I actually think that some of his criticisms are correct, even though I also think that their criticisms of science in general are often correct. But it's important to just, I'm trying to be positive, I guess. I'm trying to be constructive. And so where I don't agree, though, and this is also important, is when you use terms like magic. Okay, I hate the term magic. There are very few instances in which the term magic makes actual sense to use, and I won't get into it in this stream other than to say that our typical use of the term magic is useless. And the reason why is that when we use the term magic, what it means is something that is fake, almost. Exactly like what I said earlier with paranormal. It's like when people say, do you believe in the paranormal? It's like, by paranormal, do you mean something that doesn't exist? It's like, yes. Okay, then no, I don't believe in the paranormal. I don't believe in that which doesn't exist. And when people ask, do you believe in magic? It's like, well, what is magic? It's like, well, magic really can only be defined as that which almost doesn't exist, unless there's a few specific instances, if you're going to get into like people who are trying to practice some form of magic, I don't know, Jack Parsons or something like that. That is a different use, and maybe it would apply there. But other than that, I would say that it should not be used because in our general use of the term magic, it just means fake if something's magic. So when he says they use these terms like quantum and these various quantum like quantum and energy and these physics terms, in a manner in which they are kind of mystical, you're using them to just mean magic, and which means it means whatever you want it to mean, and therefore it's bull. But the thing is they didn't label it magic, you did. And if you can't really say that someone's definition of something it means magic, because you're stating that their definition of it is they're defining it as that which is fake, and that's not true at all. I would bet they're not defining it as that which is fake. They might be misusing the term or using it in a way that that's incoherent, or they could be using a term differently than you, but that's not necessarily it won't mean fake unless they intentionally use it and they don't believe what they're saying. If they believe what they're saying, then you can't say that their definition of these terms is just magic. And so, but here's the thing that's so difficult is some of this stuff is very well defined in science, and a lot of it is actually not. And especially when you start to get into quantum mechanics, it's really not understood by even people with degrees in the field at this point. When it comes to a lot of very concrete, I guess less fundamental parts of our science, like, I don't know, Newtonian physics and I don't know, thermodynamics and things like that. Like, that's pretty well understood because it is, when it's used by us especially, very much just an effective theory, I guess you could say, and as Eric Weinstein would put it, instead of a fundamental theory. We're not trying to get at the fundamental nature of what exactly is going on. We're trying to be able to calculate the outcome and the process that's happening and predict the process. And that's basically it. But energy, I would agree with this, even in the context of sentient singularity theory, is a property of an object or being, which, a being is a type of system, and it's also a type of object. Not every object or system is a being. Some of them are things. This is a thing. It's not a being. I am a thing and a being, you could say. But, or I am a being. A human being is also a thing, but it's more than just a thing, whereas a water bottle is not more than just a thing. It's just a thing. And it's an object. But when we get into the fundamentality of energy, the question is going to have to be asked of what is energy really, and that's pretty funny because there's a documentary that was put out by Irwin on when he was talking. It was called "What Is Reality?" I've gone over it before, probably will again at one point, and it's very good. It has millions of views, and he's talking about his theory, emergence theory, and he has this funny animation going back and forth of historical scientists where they'll say that everything is matter, and then they'll be like, no, everything is energy, and then they'll be like, no, not everything isn't energy, it's information, and then they'll be like, well, information is energy, and they're just going back and forth, and you have to ask the question of what is this information and energy even more fundamentally than those descriptors, because those are kind of descriptors. They're not. There's a container that this information is taking place within, or there is an object or a system that is responsible for creation of energy, and you have to get down to the root fundamental of unmoved mover and things like that if you're really going to get into defining energy and understanding it. But I would, for the sake of at this level that they're discussing here, I would agree with this definition of energy is a property of an object or system that can be transferred into another object or system, typically in the form of work. That makes perfect sense. If existence is fundamentally sentience, if sentience is fundamental, then you could say that energy is essentially will, if you really went very deep with it. But that's for another, maybe later on in the stream. But it's important because I recognize my own disagreeability, and my own instinct is to just be like, jump at what he says and be like, you don't know that. And it's like, that's not the point. Even if I think that he doesn't really know what he's talking about, even sometimes I think he does, but sometimes I think he doesn't. That's not the point. The point is, do I agree with what is being said truly, instead of what I think that he is, what my instincts would tell me he's trying to say. It's you have to just be self-aware. And so I thought this was him talking about Deepok Chopra. But let's see here. Audio is good. I think it's us not versus not us, not versus not. No, big E. Hope the baby's doing well. Thank you. I noticed that you didn't like the debate the Adam King show planned. I don't know which debate you're talking about. I know he did multiple ones, but the one that I watched on Elijah Schaefer's channel, I thought was a circus, to be quite honest. But that's not the point. That doesn't matter for the stream. I'm catching up from the beginning and listening at 2x speed. Cool. Anyways, next clip is him talking about Deepak Chopra. I remember making fun of Deepak Chopra, and I had no idea who he was, many years ago. And now I bet Deepak and I agree on a lot of things, but I also will say that there are some things that I hear him say in this clip even then I don't agree with, even though on the fundamental nature of reality, we'd probably be more in agreement than I would be with Dave.
Of his 1993 book, Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, The Quantum Alternative to Growing Old. This, along with his previous book called Quantum Healing, piggybacked on the broader New Age movement that was picking up steam, and he rode the tidal wave of science-flavored, self-help themed snake oil to significant fame and fortune. As you can see, quantum is a very important buzzword for this brand of deception, and it only serves to disguise mysticism as science. Given that Chopra has published nearly 100 books, there is no time to go into every single thing he's written, nor would I ever subject myself to that kind of torture. But a pervading theme across his body of work is the power of the mind. The mind, according to him, has limitless power in healing oneself, as well as shaping or even manifesting aspects of physical reality. He describes the phenomenon of perfect health, the title of another one of his books, and a selling point for his ultra-expensive wellness retreats. He advertises that those who read or attend and learn these techniques, which we could call sorcery, can be totally free of disease, never feel pain, and even halt the aging process, all simply with the mind. Of course, it seems that even Deepak himself was unable to put that last technique into practice, as he is 74 years old and he looks his age. His other favorite thing to talk about is how physics tells us that consciousness creates reality, another hallmark of the quantum mystic. Here's a taste.
There is no universe. It's a human construct. There is no body. It's a human construct for a mode of knowing and perception. There are no electromagnetic fields or molecules or atoms or waves of particles. These are human constructs for modes of knowing and experience in human consciousness. The only thing we can say with certainty about the universe, what's it made of, is it's made of nothing.
Non-locality, if you tickle the universe here, it laughs there. If you ask a question here, it answers there, because consciousness non-locally is correlated everywhere. That's the deeper question. There's mathematics to prove that.
So as we can see, even for those who aren't specifically looking to be healed, there is still plenty to bait you with. The selling points of consciousness creating reality pretty much write themselves. Realizing your infinite potential, manifesting your desires. These are all attractive notions which can ensnare suggestible people who are dissatisfied with their lives or otherwise overwhelmed by reality. It's emptiness disguised as transcendental self-improvement, something which has served as the basis for Scientology and other successful criminal organizations. To be fair, not every quantum mystic has their own cult, but some of them do. And even those that don't, should we really look the other way when people make a fortune from deliberately misleading the public? How is it that they are able to do this? The success of Deepak stems from two things. First, he uses his Indian identity and calm
Okay, so here's what I have to say this again. It's like, you should be engaging with people assuming the best. You should be assuming honest intentions. Why would you assume that Deepak is lying about what his beliefs are? Like, why can't he just be wrong if you think he's wrong, instead of thinking that he is intentionally misleading the public? And I think that is an important thing that we really need to be careful about doing, because you know, I think that it's becoming increasingly clear that the academic scientific community does not actually understand nearly as much of what they claim to understand. They have learned all of these things that they have memorized as secondhand information, and they don't really understand where the terminology came from or what it is. And I've experienced this firsthand quite a bit. When you ask mathematicians, or not mathematicians, but people with degrees in mathematics, what is Bott periodicity? What is a Calabi-Yau manifold? What does it mean to be in 11-dimensional hyperspace? Like, what does that stuff mean? They don't know. They don't know. And they don't but here's the thing. I know that they don't realize that they don't know. Or at least I assume that they don't realize that they don't know. I don't think that it's an intentional misleading by them, at least. And if I think that it would be actually very difficult to do that intentionally, including for Deepak's type of content. It would be very difficult to intentionally mislead people and continue to do so for a long time. A lot of scams end up falling apart, pretty quickly. And if it's truly an intentional scam, it doesn't last very long usually, because the lies are not able to stand the test of reality. That's just that. And so eventually they lose. And there's a lot of things that are, a lot of those things have to be found, have to have a foundation of truth to them, even if ultimately, like, there's some aspect of them that is a lie. I don't know much about Scientology. I've heard things, and it's also very possible that the things that I've heard are misinterpretations. I'm sure that there is some truth to it, otherwise it wouldn't even be here today. But I also will say that if you judge it, you should judge things by their fruit. And from what I've seen, it doesn't seem like Scientology is producing like sustainable, recurring family units over the course of multiple generations, like things like Christianity and Judaism and Islam or Mormonism and other theological traditions seem to do. Scientology does not seem to transcend generationality, and that doesn't bode well for it. But that's I don't know much about it. But it's just important to be assuming that people are telling the truth if you're going to engage with them. If you call somebody a liar, and that's your default, is this person's a liar, and you call everybody that you disagree with a liar, people are going to eventually realize that you just call everybody that you disagree with a liar, and that is not correct. It's either not correct or it's just disingenuous, and you know that they might not be a liar, but you're just doing it because it's to be overtly aggressive and gain eyes. And Brian Keating asked Dave this exact question, and I don't remember his exact answer on it, but he basically did state that it seemed like he genuinely thinks that a lot of these people are lying, but I don't remember exactly every single thing that he said in response. But he also stated that his strategy is to be extremely aggressive, and I will say that in my engaging right now with this content and Dave's content, I believe he believes what he is saying. I don't think that he is being dishonest about most of what he says, but I do think that it's important that that be true. Hopefully it is. You can't, if you think everybody's a liar though, I don't know. Like, you gotta rethink your perspective a bit, I think. But to get into Deepak, when Dave says that there is no basis, there's no scientific basis for the idea that consciousness creates reality, that's wrong. There is actually an enormous amount of scientific and logical arguments that support the idea that consciousness is fundamental to matter. But here's the thing: is that I don't disagree with a lot of what he's probably trying to attack, which is what Deepak is saying, which is that there is no matter, essentially. But that's not true, because I can feel this. You can't say that there's no matter. The question isn't whether or not matter exists. The question is, what is matter? That's the right question. You know, it's funny because it was Noam Chomsky was being interviewed by Kirchheim Mongol, and I think, and he was asked, you know, what does consciousness do? And Noam said, I think we all kind of intuitively know what consciousness is because it is our experience, but what we don't know is what is matter. And usually in scientific discussions, people assume that they know what matter is, and they assume they don't know what consciousness is. And I actually agree with Noam's perspective a bit, is you have to assume that you do know what consciousness is, at least from a first, more fundamentally than you do know what matter is, even because you experience consciousness. You do kind of experience matter, but it's a little different. You have an inside view of what consciousness is. You have an external view of what matter is. And so I think that it's true that we don't actually understand what matter is as much as we do understand actually what consciousness is. Sentient singularity theory is a theory that sentience is fundamental. You are a mind inside of a mind, and that the thoughts and perspectives of the mind that you're within trump those of your mind because it is higher than you in a hierarchy, and so you experience those information strings that are coming from the mind that you're within and subject to, therefore, as concrete, and they override yours. So that would mean that the minds that are within you, like your cells, it would experience the strings of information within you as your mind, which your mind, you are a mind. Your mind is not just your brain. You have a brain, but you are a mind. So all the strings of information within your body and experienced by you would be experienced as strings of information by the minds within you, which would be your cells, and kind of as concrete. And maybe that is just you moving, you picking up a water puddle. All your cells are now, they have to move according to this action that you've taken, and they are going to be subject to that action that you've taken, and there's no way for them to just will it away, because your will trumps their will, because they're within you. So it's this is where like energy would fundamentally be coming from will, if in fact existence is fundamentally sentient. And you have to assume that it is. And here's some of the logical arguments for why you have to assume that it is, even if it isn't. But you also should assume that it is, because you have to prioritize first-hand information above second-hand information. You have to. If you don't do that, you're not thinking anymore. You've given up your thinking process, and you have become a parrot. And not even a parrot, a robot. A parrot actually thinks, but you get the metaphor. And so you when you ask yourself, what is the truest thing that I know, which, I've talked before on here, what is, the fundamental questions that you have to ask in the first kind of like the primary questions of even first principles. The first questions of first principles would be, what is the truest thing that I know, essentially, is and first you ask, what is the first question? But that you end up in a circular logical loop. But then the next question is, what is the truest thing that I know? And it breaks you out of the loop. And the answer is, I am. You have to assume that you exist and prioritize that, your firsthand experience is truer than anything else that you're told or that you perceive secondhand or from third person. And so that means that your experience tells you that existence, to exist, is to be sentient. When I ask you, do you exist? Like, yes. Okay. What defines you? Your sentience defines you. So, okay, so that means to exist fundamentally should be assumed to be sentience. Sentience is to fundamentally exist. It is the fundamental nature of that which exists. And you need to kind of assume that to be true, or else you are not thinking anymore. And then even now, when you look at the work of Stephen Wolfram and mine and many others, like Donald Hoffman with conscious agent theory and Stephen Wolfram's hypergraph universe and my sentient singularity theory, all of these theories are built on the idea that essentially, or contain the idea that what we perceive are colors and shapes and textures and objects and everything that our perception is emergent from the structure of our information processing, the structure of mind. So the structure of our mind is responsible for the structure that we perceive. So when you see even fundamental particles or elementary particles in the standard model, there's like electrons, muons, and taus, or like the 3 generations of neutrinos, or the positive and negative quarks, which each have 3 generations. This is due to the way in which your mind is organizing information. Same thing with the primary and secondary colors. All these things follow this exact pattern. And I've shown this before on here. And here we can actually open recent. Here. Let's take a look here, just real quick. Obviously, there's so many of these, but you can see your senses follow this pattern, your sense organs, even your limbs, the colors, space-time, length, width, height, past, present, future. You can see this in, everywhere. You can see this in questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. You can see this in mathematical order of operations: parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. Language, even rocks. You can see this in even rocks. Like there's igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rocks, and there's also a binary aspect to that as well. I'm trying to find it, but I think it's like platonic igneous, and there's 2 different types of metamorphic, 2 different types of igneous, and 2 different types of sedimentary rocks, and they're definitely here somewhere, but I don't know exactly where right now. But you can see this everywhere, is my point. That means that this pattern is everywhere, and it's coming from you, and that's why you're seeing it everywhere, because your mind is going with you everywhere. But it's probably both, because sentience must be assumed to be fundamental. As I stated earlier, what is the truest thing that you know? I am. Okay, well, what does that mean? It means that existence, to exist, as far as I know, most truly is associated with, or means essentially sentience. So it's there. You need to assume that that what you are within is sentient. Existence itself is sentient. It's not just you. And this is where Deepak and a lot of these people, I think, go wrong a bit, and why people think that what they say is nonsense. And a lot of the times it's the same criticism with anyone who has a panpsychist belief, is that there is no generative structure that is outlined of the modality of sentience. It's basically that everything is sentience or consciousness. And then when people ask, well, is the water bottle conscious then? And it's like, well, yes, but to just different way. But that doesn't make any sense, because you've just defined consciousness out of existence. It doesn't matter anymore, that term. There has to be something that, when we look at a sentient being, like one of my lizards over there, versus this water bottle, one of those lizards is expressing a lot of traits that I, from my firsthand experience, would associate with being sentient, even though we don't know that they're sentient because we're not inside of their own being. I would assume that they're sentient, but there's something that distinguishes that which is sentient and that which is not, which is that which is beings and that which is just things alone. And so I understand the frustration when people say things like, oh, well, molecules don't exist and atoms don't exist and the universe doesn't exist and all that exists is nothing. It's like, you just told me nothing. Nothing. And that's useless. So, and when I actually look at what they're saying, I actually don't entirely disagree with that, but I think that it's kind of a useless statement, or it's an incorrectly worded statement. What you want to say is, fundamentally, that which exists, there is no things, it's just beings. But really, you don't even want to say that. You want to say, fundamentally, that which exists is beings. Beings are fundamental to things. That's what you would say. Because if you start saying things like, fundamentally, it's all nothing, or that which exists is just nothing, or there is nothing that exists, you can't do that. All logic breaks down, because on a fundamental level, there is no such thing as zero. There is no, in terms of it being an empty set, there is no nothing. Because that's like saying existence is fundamentally just non-existence. It's like, no, existence by definition is that which exists, and therefore excludes anything that does not exist, because that which is non-existent is fundamentally, on a fundamental level, by definition, doesn't exist. So you can't even discuss things that don't exist kind of in the negative when you're talking about things on a fundamental level. This is why the language gets so confused and the logic gets so confused. You have to be affirmative. And this is why it's a good habit to develop when you're analyzing something, you're going to be able to take a logical train of a logic train all the way to the end, and all the way from the beginning, if you are being affirmative. But if you're being negative or anti, you can't actually take things to the fundamental level. You can be like, there are no apples in my fridge, so apples are non-existent in my refrigerator. But you can't be like, non-existence exists on a fundamental level. Like, you can't do that. It just, all logic will break down. So, and this is why I have such a problem when people say that on fundamental level, they say nothing, everything is nothing. It's like, everything is nothing. What are you talking about? That doesn't make any logical sense. But you have to be, if you're going to be affirmative, you can say, on a fundamental level, that which exists is being. Not thing, but being. And yes, beings are things and beings at the same time, whereas things are not beings and are just things. And so it's not even that a being is not a thing. It's like a being is a thing, but but a thing is not a being necessarily. But a being has to be a thing necessarily. So we don't have the language in common use to describe this stuff outside of theological traditions. As Joscha Bach said, we, in an effort to kind of really dogmatically dismiss theism or separate it from science, we have kind of created even a a linguistic circumstance in which that which is religion is that which is magic, which is that which is fake, and that is bull. You know, usually, I think, depends on how you're using some of those terms, but you should assume that Deepak is just not as precise in his language as he should be, or is wrong about his fundamental belief that he has. But to just assume he's just a liar and he's deceiving everybody, where is that coming from? Is there evidence of that? If there is, I don't know about it, then I would like to see it. I'd be curious. But I don't think that you can just assume that everybody who has some belief that seems nonsensical or that seems wrong is a liar. I would like to know, does Dave, and always welcome to a discussion, but is there anybody that he believes is just wrong, who is espousing these things, but isn't a liar? That's what I want to know. But I think it's also important to recognize that while Dave is a wealth of knowledge, and that is important for many things, is important for there to be secondhand information out there, because of the nature of just being a quote unquote science communicator, which is just as I guess just a science communicator, or primarily a science communicator, because it's like, am I a science communicator? Yeah, I would say probably, but I'm more than that, because I have my own piece of work that I'm working on specifically. But if you don't, and you're just teaching about things that are already known and were figured out by others or proposed by others, that is you're going to be hindered, because you cannot be on the cutting edge, because you're not the one making the progress. You're not the one cutting the edge, so you cannot be on the cutting edge. Like, you will be behind. And so when people say things like, there's no evidence for in physics that consciousness is fundamental potentially, or that that mind is responsible for the appearance or observation of matter. Sorry if you hear things running around, it's lizards. But then there are plenty of people working on cutting edge physics projects like Stephen Wolfram, or maybe you'd call it meta-mathematical projects or metaphysics projects like me. I'd rather call my work metaphysics project, but it's the context of physics, so it's related. And Donald Hoffman and others, Chris Langan, then like that, those people have many arguments for that support the idea that consciousness is fundamental, or that your mind is responsible for the co-creation of your reality, and the mind that you're within is more responsible for the creation of your reality than even your mind is. So maybe you're responsible for 1/3 of your reality, and the mind above you is responsible for 2/3 roughly. This does run into like another kind of issue, I guess you could say, or aspect of this discussion, which is what Dave points out, is that it seems to many people to be very enticing, this idea of your mind creates your reality. Okay, first of all, how does that happen is important to know, if that is true, which I think that is. You're co-creating your reality, but that doesn't, what that means is not exactly what most people would assume it means. I don't mean that in a magical sense, but I don't even want to use that term, because that just means means fake. And so I mean that in a very rigorous sense, I guess is a way to put it that's better. And see, that's what I mean is when you're talking about things on this level of reality, you have to be affirmative. So if you want to be accurate, and you have to say something like, I mean that your mind creates or co-creates your reality, and I mean that in a rigorous sense. That's an affirmative statement, versus I don't mean that in a magical sense. It's like, well, what does that mean? Okay, well, magic is just assumed to mean that which is fake, so obviously you can't mean that, and just the logic breaks down. So it's very important, the way that we talk about this stuff. If you're going to talk about fundamental reality, your language matters so much, and that was something I wasn't expecting with this project. I might have to go. I guess the lights are off, so they should go to sleep soon, those lizards that are running around going crazy. But language is the communication. It is the transfer of information, okay? Which, and, you know, so when you're talking about fundamental information exchanges within reality, you really have to, within the context of fundamental reality, you really have to get your language to be good, I guess. There is the way in which we speak about things in relativity does not always transfer over to fundamentality. It just doesn't. That's a good way of thinking about it. So there are things that you can say in relativity when you're discussing, you know, non-fundamental objects and structures that do not logically transfer. So, yeah. But there's just so many assumptions about what people believe here. And, he just uses his Indian identity in calm, calculated manner of speech. It's like, should he not have a calm, calculated manner of speech? Should he not be Indian? You know, it's like, maybe he's just Indian, and maybe it works for him. Sure, I'm not going to disagree there. But it's like, you know, Dave is using his disagreeability, and that's fine. You know, we are who we are, and to make money off of it cannot be a critique either. Just because somebody charges a lot of money for something does not mean that it's even exploitive. It might be just more expensive than would be comfortable for me or you, but like, it's not a source of criticism. This is like a very common criticism of, you know, pastors of mega churches and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that they don't misuse funds, you know, but just like, you know, CEOs always will do this, not always, but often do that type of thing too, you know, where they say that something was a business expense when was it really a business expense? I don't know. But it's hard sometimes to detach what is a business expense for somebody who is the CEO of a company or the head of a you know, a mega church or something like that, because it's so, you're almost like always on call, and you never stop working in a way. So it's like, maybe there's specific instances where, like, if you bought alcohol just to drink or something, maybe that's not a business expense. But, you know, if you went golfing with somebody who you talked business with, is that a business expense? I don't know. But making money is not a valid criticism, and you have to criticize their specific ideas, and you have to criticize their ideas under the assumption that you think they're telling the truth. You know, I've criticized Sean Carroll a lot, especially in my earlier days. I cringe at my criticisms of Sean Carroll a bit, just because, you know, I've tried to be a little kinder since the start of this channel. But I also never thought Sean Carroll was a liar. I just think that he's wrong, and that you know, for a lot of people, most people, it's difficult to confront concepts that you know that you don't have a rebuttal to, even if you don't think that they're correct. Still, just because you don't think that you have an argument against their argument doesn't mean that you think that they're correct. It just means, like, you don't want to engage, which is more of I guess you could call it like cowardiceness than it is dishonesty. But when this was my point, is that when Dave says that it's it's very appealing. I got really sidetracked. That that consciousness is fundamental because that means you can manifest all this stuff in your life. Manifest your destiny. Manifest your house. Manifest your cars. Manifest your dream job. Your dream relationship. Whatever. I actually think that this stems from a halfway understanding of what that would imply. If consciousness is fundamental, then you're inside a mind. And that means that, yeah, you do have probably more influence over your mind, and your thoughts have more influence over your world than you would think. But from a more materialist perspective, but that's you also have to take it the next step, which is that means that you're inside of a mind more powerful than yours, and that your will would therefore also be subject to theirs. It's not just that you have, if consciousness is fundamental, then you can get whatever you want. It means that there is a being that you should recognize, that you need to recognize has a will that trumps yours, that you're within, that you're subject to. And they might let you do things that they wouldn't necessarily want for the sake of meaning and, you having free will, which is responsible for meaning. If there's no free will, there's no differentiation. If there's no differentiation, then there's no meaning. But that doesn't mean, though, that you're not subject to another. So it's like when people say that consciousness is fundamental, that's a theological belief. If you take it to its ultimate conclusion, it means God exists, essentially. But existence, meaning, when I said God exists, I mean existence is a single sentient being with its own will and thoughts and desires and feelings and goals and everything, just like you. If that's the case, which logic seems to imply that is inevitable, and I would invite Dave or anybody else to argue against that, but I don't think they'd be able to do it. But if they can, I'll admit it. But I don't think so. But if that's the case, which it seems to be, then you have moral responsibilities to a being greater than yourself. You can't just pursue your own desire without consequence, because you should actually prioritize the will of the being that you're within over your own will if there is a conflict between the two. That is not actually a very appealing idea to many people. And so you start off with consciousness is fundamental, therefore manifestation is real, whatever that, really means. But it just means, your mindset influences how your life, the trajectory of your life, in a way that is greater than what you would think if you were just purely a materialist, which is that it would just all be random and you have no control outside of your material actions. But if sentience is fundamental, then it's more of an interaction with, consciousness, with a greater consciousness, and that maybe helps you get things that you might want, depending on what it is. And that's an appealing idea, and I get that. And so, and I do have a problem with that community not taking it further sometimes, where it's like, oh, it's all the manifestation crowd. I will admit, even though I don't necessarily disagree with their metaphysical assumptions, I do think that it's an incomplete moral perspective, I guess. You're not responsible solely for your existence and your life and your world. You're co-creative, not creating your own reality. You're co-creative of your reality, but you're also not the one who ultimately has the last word as to what your life is like, even though you might be allowed to move it in a direction that you would want, whatever direction you would want, at first at least. And so, but then, so it starts off as like a very appealing idea of you can manifest a Ferrari. But then it goes to, oh, actually, no, you have also moral responsibilities if sentience is fundamental, because you're subject to a sentience that you're within, and your will is subject to its will. But then you take it even further and you realize that if oneness is the default of existence, which it is, because existence is by definition all that exists, and so oneness is the default, then any segmentation or partitioning of sentience from oneness into multiplicity is a very intentional action, which means like you were created by a being who wants you here, for whatever reason, but that you mean something to this being, and you can get into the very deep notions and take the idea of love to its ultimate conclusion, which is that you will end up at that God or sentient existence loves you more than you can love yourself, more than your parents could love you. I was thinking about my daughter, and I was talking to my wife, and I was like, it's amazing how much I love this little girl, like every day more and more. And but I do not even love her as much as God does. And that's a wonderful idea, actually. It's not a bad thing. It's like, that's good. You want someone who's wiser than you and who sees all, and to actually care even more about your children than you do. Why is that not a bad thing? But so it kind of, depending on how complete your perspective is on this panpsychist route, to panpsychism to theism route, you alternate between, is this appealing or is this not appealing? But there's appealing and not so appealing aspects of this concept. So I think that I think it's more important to focus on the relationship that you have with God or with sentient existence than it is to focus on the fact that if everything is consciousness, then you actually have the ability to manifest. The manifestation is more of a real thing than you would have otherwise assumed, whatever exactly that means. But it just means that your focus is orienting within your the journey of you as an information structure through the cosmos. So like if you focus on the right things, like, is manifestation real? Yeah, it is. Does that mean it means exactly what people think it means when they talk about it? No. But is it more real than it would be assumed to be by a materialist? Yeah, it is. But should that be the focus of your spiritual life? No, absolutely not. The focus should be your relationship with the sentience that is responsible for your existence. I hope that makes some sense. Just caught up from starting 24 minutes behind. Cool. Thank you. Jeez. So this is interesting. He's talking about life in this next clip.
Crystals, what are they? No, seriously, look at all these amazing structures and forms. They're beautiful, they're powerful, and they're life. Crystals are the essence of life manifesting within the earth, the blossoms of the mineralogical portion of the earth. Recognition of these energies and forms of crystals can greatly benefit your personal growth. It is a very basic consciousness, not as intricate or advanced as some life on earth. Crystals definitely don't have the thinking capacity of humans, or even the biological reproductive systems of plants, but they are life.
No, crystals are not alive. There are very specific criteria that qualify something as being alive, including metabolic activity, which is lots of chemistry happening inside all the time, response to stimuli, growth, and reproduction. Crystals are inert. They are not alive, period. The word life has a rigorous definition, and it can't just be applied to any random object.
Crystals are
response to stimuli, growth.
Okay, I think that this is kind of an important thing to touch on, is this is wrong. If you are actually following more cutting edge conversations about the science of life, quote unquote, then you know that this does not have actually such a rigorous definition. And there are proposals being made by very, very serious and very accredited, and working scientists and professors at various universities that reframe this entire discussion and kind of propose different definitions for what would be alive. And this is another one of those things that's like magic almost. The problem is the word. When we're talking about that which is life, we don't realize it, but if sentience is fundamental, then we're talking about fundamental existence when we're talking about life. Because if I ask you what is something that is alive versus that which is dead, okay, if I tell you, point to an animal, and I'm like, is that animal dead or alive? What you're going to look at is its consciousness still present in its body, essentially. And that, or in this, in space-time, is its consciousness still present in space-time? That means that sentience is what we intuitively use, actually, in common use, to define that which is alive and that which is not. Okay? And we don't have this rigorous definition of criteria for being alive is perform metabolism. What is metabolism? Obviously, like, it has a definition, but that definition actually does apply to different, more fundamental levels of matter than just cellular life. It does. And, it's just the exchange of information that we perceive as matter. That's what it is. It's the, recycling of energy and matter and information. And that's it. Like, that's just because you call it metabolism, and on this level, it has to do with these specific molecules and the conversion of energy in the ways that we typically think about it, doesn't mean that process or a process that in every way that is important isn't still occurring on lower levels than just cellular life. Then it says the capacity for reproduction. Maybe, but maybe not, like, do you have the capacity for reproduction? I'm not talking about like you plus another person, because we are sexually reproductive beings. You don't have the capacity for reproduction. I don't on my own. I don't. But then if I asked you, is a family alive, or is a marriage alive? Maybe you say yes, but maybe you say, no, that's not a living being. It's like two living beings. But it's like, it has all these things that you have, right, listed right here, whereas I don't on my own. And so, response to stimuli. You don't think that even atoms respond to stimuli? Like, how do you think different elements are made? By different conditions. It's like evolution happens inside a star, and you get different species of atoms. They used to call them different species, the different elements. They didn't call them elements, they called them species. I even heard today they were talking about molecules with something that I was listening to, and it was much more contemporary, and they even said in that one they called different molecules species, different chemicals species. And cellular composition, let's see here, why is that there? When you and here's the thing, I actually think that it makes sense that it's there, but the problem is that when we say cells means multiple things. Cells means like the kind of abstract definition of a cell, which is like a portion or an isolated part that is that is repetitive within an assembly, essentially. So, but we also mean like cells, like biological cells that like your blood cells and skin cells and and all the cells that make up your body, hair cells, whatever it is, bones, and so the cells in your body. I guess I don't know if you would actually have cells. You definitely have cells inside your bones, but I don't know if that every aspect of your bone would be composed of cells. I don't think that's true. But still, you are composed of cells essentially. And so, but when it's used by people in traditional academia today, especially science communicators who are only science communicators, who are not actually working on any kind of new work, and anything that is new is cutting edge, you could say. Like, it's not, we use cutting edge to mean like prestigious to some degree, but anything that is new is, essentially cutting edge. Then you're going to use cellular to mean just like cells. And so on an abstract level, I actually think that almost makes sense to have a cellular composition. But really what it is it's when you look at like sentient singularity theory, and you look at the periodicity of sentience that I have, which is this, essentially, which is like life, quote unquote, starts, I believe, at hadrons, which is protons and neutrons, which are assemblies of quarks which are not themselves alive. They're like a finger of a bit larger being, which would be the universe, essentially. Then you have atoms, which are assembly of hadrons. Molecules are assemblies of atoms. Cells are assemblies of molecules. Organisms, which are assemblies of cells. Families are assemblies of organisms. Castes, that's the best word I can use, but it's probably not the best word that we could use. It's the best word I know of right now, which is an assembly of families, and technological singularity is an assembly of castes. Maybe that is the best term, but it just has so many connotations to it, which is a problem. And I don't mean it the same way that most people would think. And then you would have universal singularity, and it would just repeat this process, which is the logos of life. And it alternates, maneuvers in space via individuals, maneuvers in time via lineage, maneuvers in space via individuals, maneuvers in time via lineage. And it just goes on and on. This is like the periodicity of life. And so all of these things would be alive, according to sentient singularity theory, essentially. And then that which is not within one of these is not technically a living being. And you have to have that. Otherwise, life, it doesn't have a consistent definition. If it doesn't have a universal definition, but universal, I guess, doesn't necessarily mean that it also applies to water bottles. But it does. But it's that it doesn't apply to water bottles, and you know it because water bottles don't fit it. But there is also a continuous chain of causality which is required in any kind of logical, coherent system that is, contextualizing of that which would be life, and which would be that which is sentient, is really what we're asking. And so, all of those things respond to stimuli. All of them. Protons and neutrons interact with each other. They do, and so it's like, what does it mean to respond to stimuli? There's a lot of things that would respond to stimuli that we don't think of that currently as life, but would probably be best described as life. The problem is that life is not it's almost a useless term, because really what you have to think about, what does it mean when you're defining life? Like, what is the core property of that which is alive? It's like sentience. That's the core property of that which is alive. When you're no longer alive, you're no longer sentient. When you are alive, you are sentient. But this is our first-hand understanding of it. But we've completely cast that understanding to the side in favor of this second-hand, out of context definition of life, where people come in and they're like, in science, we have a very rigorous definition of life. Okay, that's it. No, actually, no. Almost. But if the thing is that if that is the definition, and it's exactly the way that it's being interpreted by people like Dave, how he's interpreting this, that is what it's meant to be interpreted as, then the term life doesn't actually tell us anything important, because it's arbitrary. It's not just this rigorous definition. It is actually an arbitrary definition. And it's almost there. I will admit, it's almost there. What we would want this to be is like criteria for being alive. Process information, okay? Like truly process information, not be used as a tool for information processing, but truly process information. Like my computer doesn't actually process information. I do. My computer just helps me. Capacity for reproduction, okay, in some way, yes, or capacity for growth, okay. Response to stimuli, okay, fair enough. I mean, you could define it as a little different than just response, but it should be defined as, having the capacity for taking action, not just being reactive, but being active. I would say is kind of part of that. And then cellular composition, I guess I would just go on to say that it's got a holonic structure. It's got oneness. You are one being, and you are composed of many ones, many cells. And those are composed of many molecules, which are intrinsically themselves one, which are composed of atoms, which are intrinsically themselves one, which are composed of hadrons, which are intrinsically themselves one. So there is a holonic structure to it. Is a better way of putting it than just cellular composition, because cells are assumed to mean biological cells, when in reality, if you look at Excel, this is a cell. 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 It's a repetitive container of information, but that makes up an assembly. But there's a better way of putting that, which is just that it's a holonic structure. It follows a holonic structure. So if you go to sentientsingularity.com and you're like, look at writings, and you look at the technical description of existence here, and you say, you read what sentient singularity theory, my work, describes existence to be. It says, sentient singularity theory describes the totality of existence as a singularity of sentience that is creating additional sentient singularities within itself. Sentience is the phenomenon of feelings, sensations, or emotions. Singularity is defined as something that is one distinct unit or something that is especially unique. Sentient singularity theory that also denotes a singularity as a structure that has the property of infinite oneness, which is such as a Mobius strip, which it's more metaphorical, but not exactly, or one being that is composed of many beings, such as a multicellular organism. And so then it says, sentient singularity theory therefore can be understood to imply that everything that exists is part of a single universal sentient being that is producing an infinitely growing number of other sentient beings within itself. These additional sentient singularities, or singularities of sentience, or self-aware beings are arranged into a nested, quasi-periodic fractal pattern of stacked holonic structures. Okay? Basically, that means like a cellular composition. But not in the way that he means it, but in a much more fundamentally, fundamental definition or universal definition of a cellular composition, not just biological. But this pattern forms a single self-reflective knot of perception heading an assembly body that integrates multiple entangled strings of information. Okay, so, and it goes on. But this is... I bet you if he read that, and I'm not sure, but like I would imagine, he would say this is pseudoscience because you're using terms like singularity and you don't know what that means, and actually like it's very rigorously defined in science, and as the center of a black hole. And guys, that definition of a singularity is not completely understood. Yes, there's math that we associated with it, but that doesn't mean that it's rigorously understood. And also, my definition of a singularity here doesn't mean that you can't also use that definition for that, but for the center of a black hole. But the definition that I'm using is the definition that existed already before black holes were even a concept. So So you can't say that, oh, my definition is just pseudoscience and I'm just stealing. I'm not stealing a definition. Look up the definitions. Singularity. Singularity. The state, fact, quality, or condition of being singular. Okay. A point at which a function makes an infinite value, especially in space-time, where matter is infinitely dense as part of the black hole. Okay, so it's giving that as an example, but it's not the definition. Another definition right here, it says unusual or distinctive manner or behavior. It's like meaning it's unique. That which is it's a singularity. It's that which is unlike any other. And all of these different definitions essentially fit with how I'm using it. And but I've heard so many people say, get that word out of your mouth. Don't say holon, or don't say hadron, not holon. Don't say hadron. Don't say singularity. It's like, why not? But here's the thing: is people say quantum, and I have tried to actually avoid saying quantum and more and more. But the thing is that you actually have to use it, and the reason why it resonates so well, and people will be like, oh, now you're talking about vibrations. But reason why it resonates so well with people when they say your quantum consciousness, your quantum existence, your quantum reality, however it is that Deepak usually uses this term or others, is it works. It's like, what does quantum mean? People will say, oh, it's very rigorously defined in science. It's like quantum has a definition that existed before the standard model of elementary particles. And then that's why they used the term quantum, because it fit with what they were describing there, but it already existed. So you can't say that you can't use that term for instances beyond, quantum physics in the way that we think of as quantum physics currently. But quantum means a discrete quantity of information proportional in magnitude to the frequency of the radiation it represents. Okay? The unit quantity a required or allowed amount, especially an amount of money legally payable in damages. So or a share or portion. It's a single it's just a defined set, I guess you could say, almost. A quantum. It's a quantity. That's what it is. So you can't say that you can't apply it to all these other things. And just because you do, it doesn't make it pseudoscience. That word existed. Quantum definition. Discrete amount, and analogous to any discrete amount of any other physical quantity, and it's almost self-referential, so you have to use it in its own definition, such as momentum or electric charge. Latin quantus, English quantity. Okay. Quantum, right here. Quantity or amount, portion or part. Any small, very small increments or parcels in which many forms of energy are subdivided. Any of the small subdivisions of a quantized physical magnitude. It's like you can't take this word away from people if it didn't originally just apply to this, the interactions of the elementary particles in the standard model, and this equation specifically or that equation specifically. No, it was adopted by them, and that's fine. But you can't therefore be like, oh no, it means something very, very specific in science. No, it doesn't. It means exactly what I just showed you.
And reproduction. Crystals are inert. They are not alive, period. The word life has a rigorous definition, and it can't just be applied to any random object.
Crystals are defined as being a mineralogical body with a characteristic internal structure and enclosed by a symmetry of plane faces. They are, however, much more than that.
No, they are not.
We've discussed before that everything in the universe is a vibration, existing through many different frequencies at once. Our physical bodies are on this physical plane, but the sounds that we hear vibrate to a different frequency, as with smells and even thoughts. Crystals also vibrate to many frequencies at once.
We are discovering some more key buzzwords for the quantum mystic: vibration and frequency. These are used just like energy as being synonymous with magic. That atoms and molecules vibrate doesn't mean they can cast magic spells, and frequency is just a word that means number of cycles per unit time, and has no significance when not applied to a concretely defined phenomenon. When the mystic says higher frequencies, they mean good frequencies, which doesn't mean anything, just like good energy doesn't mean anything. When the quantum mystic says that something is emitting frequencies or vibrating to frequencies, they mean that it is magic, and they want to use a scientific vocabulary word to pretend that magic is real.
That is just such a characterization that may or may not be true, but it's like I said, to say that something is magic is nonsense. Just say it's wrong. There's no reason to call something magic. It's a bad word. I at the beginning of this channel, I said there was some words that I constantly was saying were bad words, and one of them was magic. And the other ones were like esoteric or pseudoscience or anything like that, because they don't actually tell you anything that is useful, and they usually don't actually apply to anything fundamental. So or even like paranormal. I don't like the term paranormal, but because anything that implies that something is false or fake, you cannot say that they mean it to mean magic. They might mean it to. They might think that that you can do things that you can't, or that they might think that something is true that is not. But that doesn't mean that you should just dismiss them as people who believe in magic, because what that means in the logical way in which that phrase must be interpreted is they believe in something that is fake. Magic used to mean, like I said, two things. One of them is like Jack Parsons type of like weird magic, and that might be something real, but or it also has been used in the past to mean like magic shows, like I don't know, like illusions, which in one of those cases it doesn't apply to things beyond very specific metaphysical goal that is not usually a positive one, and the other one it just means something that looks that is fake. Basically, that's what it means. To say it's something is magic from a magic show is, but if you're assuming that you know that it's meant to be an illusion, then it's one thing. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to a magic show. I don't believe in magic, though. I'm going to, like, magic in that definition, in that circumstance, means like to show us an illusion that we don't understand, but it looks cool. But then if you said to somebody, oh no, he actually believes in magic, it's like it's already been defined as that which is fake. So you're saying he believes in that which is fake. And, who said that, you have all the answers. If you're saying that somebody believes in that which is fake, I don't know. Nobody has all the answers. You could be wrong. They could be right. I'm sure about everyone is right about something, and everybody's wrong about something. And so that's just important to remember. But these buzzwords, I get it. Manifestation, frequency, quantum, all these terms are used in the I don't know, I guess I'll call them the spiritual but not religious crowd, or the people would call them the woo crowd. And I don't say that as to be demeaning. Some woo is true. That's the point of this entire stream, is that just to call something woo doesn't mean it's not true. But it's very important to be impeccable with our word, because if you don't state things properly, then you have set up a circumstance in which it is impossible to actually transmit true information or exchange true information. And so that is what is happening here. If you're talking about things involving fundamental reality, you can't talk about that, define them as that which doesn't exist. You're just, at that point, you might as well just call them a liar. In which case, you might as well just not be engaging with them at all and just focus on something constructive. But
is the natural of any form in the universe.
Okay. But when he says crystals are more than just, this crystal structure, it's like, he's like, no, they're not. It's like, how could they not be more than that? That doesn't mean that they are exactly what they think that they are. I actually think, here's a crystal. And when I first started this work, I was like trying to map like the periodicity of life. And I had, biological, and then I had mineral, and I was like, well, crystals seem to be alive, actually. Like people say that, but like it really does seem like they are alive, and they fit all these definitions of things that are alive. They do things that seem to be consistent with that which is life. We have a crystal structure, which is a repetitive pattern that we produce and are attached to, and they just seem to be a simpler form of that. But I actually now don't necessarily believe that they are alive in the way that we actually should be defining life, which is that which is sentient. So, but we don't need the term life. See what I'm saying? We don't. Not in the objective sense of the word. We can use it in terms of the subjective sense of the word. Is that person alive over there who's on the bench? Are they alive and asleep, or are they dead and not alive? But to use it in terms of like life is actually a useless thing, and it's almost a bad word. I think it is a bad word. A bad word is a word that doesn't that can't be used in according to its definition, its common definition, in a way that is true. Okay? So, like, esoteric, like, usually means that which is beyond and kind of vague and useless. Even though if you look up the dictionary definition, it just means hidden, but it now means something different. And but the common way in which it's used is and understood, I think, makes it a bad word. Life, not alive. The term alive makes sense, but life, that is probably a bad word. And because if everything is sentience, and sentience is not everything, but if sentience is fundamental, not everything is sentient, because that's actually an incorrect way to phrase things. Then life, then existence itself is fundamental. Existence is life, essentially. But so you don't need the term. It's just confusing, and so we should do away with it. Honestly, I don't think we should use the term life. You have to, when people say what is life, we need to get to the point of defining it and then moving on. What is the definition? I'm going to call it that which is sentient. Sentience is life. And it kind of has to be. Otherwise, you can't say that which is a sentient being that is no longer alive is, no longer sentient. Our first-hand understanding of this needs to trump our second-hand definition that we've been told, which is all of these, criteria that he listed earlier. You have to use your first-hand understanding of that definition or of that experience or state, and that should trump your secondhand information. So if a professor tells you that life has to be this, and that is contradictory to your firsthand experience, which is that which is alive is that which is sentient, then don't believe the secondhand definition. Like, you have to believe your firsthand, the definition that you understand firsthand. Obviously, anybody that argues against this is arguing against logic and thinking itself. You can't prioritize secondhand information above firsthand information. You can't do it. We have a firsthand understanding of what it means to be alive. And that has to trump everything else. But I don't think that most crystals would be defined as life, I guess. But it's that the molecules would be probably. But then I don't think, like, if you look at a crystal, like, this is one, and this is another one, and this is another one. And I could be wrong, but I don't think so anymore. And so I agree. I would agree with the statement that crystals are not sentient. But the molecules in them are, and is that the crystals? Or is, truly? Yeah, actually. So, I mean, it just depends on how on the specifics of it. But it does depend on the specifics of it. Okay. This I thought was interesting.
Tended to get people nodding their heads, pretending they are learning about deep truths in physics.
Garrett demonstrates to us how the particles that create point particles really work. He shows that when you plot them out in how they move, this is what they look like. At the tiniest scales of the universe and how it works is very beautiful.
What is this? Subatomic particles are not colored squares and circles and triangles. What are we looking at? What do these symbols represent? Not even a half-assed attempt to explain anything is offered, just random images acting as a backdrop for word salad.
Now, look at this. This is one of the ways that these charges branch off from each other. As you can see, it flows in a hexagonal pattern, the same pattern that we found in the expanded flower of life. Then, if you rotate this pattern in six-dimensional charge space, you see it forms yet another pattern. Many of you will recognize this as the shape of the Star of David, but its true name is the star tetrahedron, which maps perfectly over the fruit of life.
People love cool shapes, so the quantum mystic shows lots of cool shapes. Again, meaningless.
Okay, for those of you who watched my stream last week, there's no such thing as that which is totally meaningless. There's always information is information, and it doesn't mean that your interpretation of something is always correct, but it means that there's no such thing as that which is random and meaningless. There is not. It is mathematically, logically impossible for that to be the case. But this is what I mean by when you're just a science communicator and that's it, and you're not working on your own thing, then you're not going to be seeing that which is actually kind of more of the cutting edge work that's being done. And if you go to what that clip that he's referencing there is, which is from a YouTube channel called psuedo-science, is what they're referencing is Garrett Lisi's work. Garrett Lisi is an American theoretical physicist. This is Eric Weinstein's self-described arch nemesis. He is responsible for the releasing of this paper right here. An exceptionally simple theory of everything, years ago. And where he proposes a fundamental framework for physics, essentially. And he has all these shapes in here. As you can see, here's a Star of David hexagon, symmetry structure. And he has these symbols mapped onto the different elementary particles. So, he has them mapped to the quarks and electrons and gluons and, the various fermions and bosons in the standard model. But this was very rigorous work. can see here, though, he has this shape shown. And here you can see he's got his matrices showing everything. There's E8. His theory is based on E8, mathematical structure of E8. He even has the Star of David structure shown here, or this hexagonal star structure, and also this flower of life structure shown in his paper. And I'm not saying that his proposal is accurate. I think that a lot of it is probably like he's onto something. I will say he's definitely onto something, but I'm not going to say that his work is completely accurate. I don't know. I haven't looked at it quite enough to know for sure, but I will say that he's definitely onto something. I've looked at it enough to know that. And if you go to his Particle Explorer, and I've shown this before, right here. This is he worked on this, written by Garrett, Lisi, Troy Gardner, and Greg Little. You can see right here. This is the bosons. This is what these symbols represent. These are what the symbols represent as terms of the the fermions and their various properties. But when you have Dave Farina basically saying, I don't want to say Professor Dave. I don't want to call anybody professor or anything unless I'm not in school, and I didn't even like doing that in school. But when you have Dave Farina basically saying this is all nonsense, and he is saying they don't make an attempt to explain it, but he also states that elementary particles are not little triangles and circles.
Many of you will recognize this as the shape of the Star of David, but its true name is the star tetrahedron, which maps perfect.
Particles are not colored squares and circles and triangles. What are we looking at? What do
It's like they know what they're looking at. They referenced who made it. He said Garrett shows us. Okay, and you can hear him say it. So obviously they know what they're looking at. They're not just presenting this model and just leaving it at, look at these little triangles and squares. Obviously. So that's kind of, it's a very least an oversight. I'm not going to say it's disingenuous because I hope that Dave is not being disingenuous, but it's an oversight, and it's an obvious oversight. But this is an amazing model that you can play with on the differentialgeometry.org, and you can maneuver this in different ways, and you can look at the different relationships of the elementary particles when they are kind of put into this this E8 structure, and you can go to SU5 and see that, and move that around. You can go to SO10 and move that around. You can look at it from a physics perspective, a math, a gut, triality. You can go E7, E6. I used to be able to do E6. It looks like they took it out. E8. One generation. Standard model. It's fascinating. You can change the axis in which you are, rotating these things, these structures. It's amazing. You can just start over, do it again. But you can look at oh, look, the strong force, basically. It looks like the flower of life. Gravity weak, gravity weaker, B and L triality. Oh, look at that. It's I don't know exactly what B and L means, but I guess it's just triality of the particles in the of the elementary particles. But this is that Star of David shape, and you can just go and maneuver all of these. Look at that. Maneuver that one. It's very cool. It's very cool. This is groundbreaking work, regardless of whether or not his fundamental assumptions are true and whether or not his theory is accurate. I don't know what that means at this point. You know, I don't think anybody's going to put out a paper and an entire framework where all of it's going to be perfectly accurate and or all of it's going to be completely false either at this point. I think that he's onto something. That's what I'll say. So this is actually something that is legit work that they were referencing, and it's just dismissed. Don't be so quick.
Symbols represent. Not even a half-assed attempt to explain anything is offered, just random images acting as a backdrop for word salad.
Now, look at this. This is one of the ways that these charges branch off from each other. As you can see, it flows in a hexagonal pattern, the same pattern that we found in the expanded flower of life. Then, if you rotate this pattern in 6-dimensional charge space, you see it forms yet another pattern. Many of you will recognize this as the shape of the Star of David, but its true name is the star tetrahedron, which maps perfectly over the fruit of life.
People love cool shapes, so the quantum mystic shows lots of cool shapes. Again, meaningless.
What? I don't understand what that even means.
Shape, as we learned, is not only the root of all mathematical proportion, light, the platonic solids, but is also the source of every musical system in the universe, including systems both used and unknown to modern man. What is a soul? There is still no concrete answers to this question.
No, there are no scientists trying to explain what a soul is, because that is not a scientific concept. Science is the study of the physical world. Anything supernatural, by definition, is not science, and there is no evidence that anything supernatural exists. This disconnect encapsulates the problem with quantum mystics. If someone wants to believe in a soul or speculate about the supernatural, they can go ahead and do so, but to pretend that it is supported by science is ludicrous.
This is what I mean, is that, first of all, science is the study of that which is physical. Until when? Isn't mathematics science? You tell me the physical manifestation of Bott periodicity or of a Calabi-Yau manifold. Tell me. You can't, most likely. But I'm not even saying that there isn't one. I actually think that there is a manifestation of that structure that you can point to. But the idea that it's just the study of that which is physical is wrong. You can't do that. You can't change the definition of science. Science is a method of trying to discover what is true, I guess you could say. But it's also a language, you could say that. But it isn't just truth. It can't just be truth. It's the study of that which is physically true, and that's it. No, it's not. It's way more than that. Of course it is. Of course it is. And the idea that science is not attempting to understand the soul is also incorrect. What is the current, focus in, especially around the physics community, even if it's not the exact physics community, it's those who are around them, is the attempt to understand sentience or consciousness or self-awareness. That is the study of the soul. Sentience is the soul. The idea that, it's just this supernatural concept. And then remember what I said about how people define supernatural as that which doesn't exist, and that's a nonsensical definition, because if you are defining it as that, then don't even use the term. Don't even use the term. But if you're going to define it as that which doesn't exist, which is basically what he did, he said, it is... there's no evidence for anything that is supernatural that exists. What does supernatural mean? What does supernatural mean? Non-physical? Okay. We definitely know that the non-physical exists, and we study it all the time. Music and math and these, different higher dimensional geometries and things like that. Like, this is all thought of currently as non-physical. I actually think it's much more linked to... It's all much more linked than we think, but there aren't things that are just purely abstract that exist, that don't actually have any connection to that which is, our experience. I don't believe that that's true at all. But if a Calabi-Yau manifold is the structure of information processing within a mind, then is that a physical structure? And is studying it a physical pursuit is maybe, it's responsible for the creation of the observation of the structures that we observe to be physical. So maybe, but this is why these terms are just not good. They work in a specific context. They don't work when they're applied to the fundamental. Physical does not work when it's applied to the fundamental. It doesn't. And it can be linked to that by contextualizing it properly if you get it right as to what it is, what is physicality, what is the observation of that which is physical, where does that come from? And if you assume that it just exists and that it doesn't come from anywhere, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are right. And you also, I would say that that perspective, you're going to run into logical walls in that idea's ability to explain things. And you have to assume that the idea that's more able to explain things should be, taken more seriously than the idea that's not able to explain things. So, it's just very important to not talk past each other, which starts with getting our language correct. And I think that, so many people out there that have such an important, component to add to this discussion, and on all sides of this. And you can't disregard physicality is not fake. I experience that which we call physical, but what is it? Where does it come from? That is a question. But you can't just say that, the soul is not a scientific concept. Consciousness is a scientific concept. And to say that it's not, it means that we have eliminated first-hand experience from any kind of understanding that would be able to be linked to a scientific pursuit, which means science is no longer able to understand anything, because you have to prioritize first-hand information in any attempt to understand. And if you divorce first-hand information, you can no longer use it in order to orient and make sense of the world in anything that is associated with quote unquote being science. Then science is no longer able to do anything useful at that point. It's just not. And we're seeing that, I think. I think people have accidentally done this. They've accidentally divorced their first-person information or first-person experience or first-hand information from the conversation that is the scientific conversation. And that is going to render science absolutely useless. It will. You can't sense make without a hierarchy of sense making. That hierarchy is first-hand information above second-hand information. And so, and granted, a lot of this is issues with just, we're speaking different languages, even if we're both speaking English. And I say the soul, and you're like, the soul doesn't exist. What do you mean when what do you think the soul is when you say the soul doesn't exist? What does that mean? Because I just define soul as my consciousness. And are you saying you don't have a consciousness? Because you just defined yourself out of existence, in which case, stop arguing with me. So I understand that they're defining it as something that which is nonsensical. But whatever that definition that's nonsensical in their head is, it's not the same as my definition, which is just your sentience, your selfness. That is your soul. Your sense of self. Your experience of yourself, being yourself. That is your soul. It is obviously your soul. It's the part of you that is sentient. It's the part of you that's you. There is no you without that sentient being. There is no I. So when you say, you don't have a soul, No. You can't even say that. That doesn't even make any sense. Because you just said you. You can't say, I don't have a soul. No, you can't even say that. You can't even say I. You can say this water bottle doesn't have a soul. Fine. You can't say you don't have a soul or I don't have a soul. You can't use the words you or I if you're going to try and do that. And yes, science is very much concerned currently with what is consciousness, which is what is the soul. And I actually think they're going about it backwards because they're not prioritizing firsthand information or firsthand experience. What they should be doing is recognizing that fundamentally someone exists because I exist and I am someone and I am sentient. And so sentience we know more so than we know anything else to be true. We know that sentience exists and let's work from there. But instead, they're working backwards, thinking they're working forwards. They're saying, we know rocks exist. And how do we get to proving sentience exists? It's like, you don't need to prove sentience exists. It's self-evident to anyone that you would even discuss anything with that it exists, because everyone is sentient. Anyone that is someone is sentient. You don't have to, it's self-evident. You don't have to convince them that sentience exists or define it. Everything else has to be defined by that, not that defined by everything else. You can't define sentience by starting at rocks. You can get to rocks by starting at sentience, though. And so we're going backwards and we don't realize it. We think we're going forwards and we're not. We're going backwards. But like I said, part of this is it's a difference in language. But we have gotten we went so dogmatically, in the direction of divorcing sentience from science that because we were trying to divorce religion from science, because we're trying to divorce dogma from science. But the reality is that you can divorce dogma from science while also not, but you cannot divorce sentience from science. We overdid it, just like humans always do. We're like, oh, well, maybe we don't, that doesn't make sense, so we won't do that, but, we'll stop before we go down the road of nonsense. We never stop before we go down the road of nonsense. We go right past nonsense lane with everything. As a group, we can't stop it. Individuals can, but not the group. Okay. See the chat. Tyler, I sent you an Instagram DM last night about something that I believe will be extremely interesting to you. It's extremely convincing evidence that may corroborate your theory of reality. Okay, I'll check it out. That was a hilarious depiction of a fortune teller. Yeah. This whole video is hilarious, I think. I don't want to spam you, but this is the last time I'll comment. The message I sent you is hard evidence that provides a direct refutation to atheism, a confirmation of your theory. Thank you. I will definitely check it out. True Woo sounds like a great title for a show or podcast. It really would be. Thank you for your conflated esoteric with cult. I think you conflated esoteric with a cult. A cult, literally, definition that is hidden, but esoteric denotes a level of obscurity, specialized or little known information. I know that a cult means hidden, but I guess esoteric, I didn't define it as well. I did kind of use the definition of a cult. What I meant was esoteric means like that which is for a specific few almost, which is kind of like hidden from the rest of us, but it's not intentionally hidden. It's just, it's not for everyone, but it's used to mean kind of what you were saying it means at first, which is that it obscure and which is different than specialized or little known. If it's like, that's what I was trying to say, is that the original definition was essentially specialized or little known, but it's changed to mean obscure and vague and useless and meaningless. And that is not its original definition of specialized or little known was fine, but its definition of vague or useless or kind of obscure. I mean, obscure is part of the problem, because obscure kind of means weird, but also can mean like vague and like abstract. So it's just lost its meaning is my original point. But yeah, you're right. Occult means hidden, but esoteric used to mean like reserved for a select few, which is kind of intrinsically hidden, but not like intentionally hidden. If that makes sense. But the esoteric knowledge was reserved for the occult, and it's very associated. So they're very tied. But yeah, you're not really wrong. If it's cool, it's just a random thing. There's of course a lot of natural overlap in the two concepts. Okay, you already said exactly what I was saying. This guy is too much. Reminds me of myself when I was like 19. So many assertions and a bit of wrath about things he hasn't taken or even had a time to look in depth into. I don't know if you obscure means little known. Yeah, it also, to obscure something though is to like mess it, murky the waters, I guess. So it's linked. It's used to mean that. I don't know if that's a dictionary definition. I don't actually know, but yeah, I know obscure means like little known, but it also means, I think it's used to mean like to like when you're it's like linked to like obstructed. It's like your view is obstructed. If that makes any sense. Obscure. Let's look it up. But you're not wrong. I just think it's used to mean more than that. Not discovered or known about, or uncertain. To keep from being seen, to be concealed. Yeah, obstructed. It's like covered. But yeah, those words are obscure. Yeah. I don't normally like just breaking down like things like this in negative way, I guess, to be anti. I'm not trying to be anti, but like I said, I wouldn't be if I thought that Dave Farina, I don't want to call him Professor Dave again, was not somebody who had anything of value to add to this discussion, I wouldn't be talking about his video. I actually think he has a lot to add. There was another video that I would like to one day give a comment on, and maybe we can have a live discussion one day or something, but where he's talking about evolution, and he's refuting creationism to some degree, or he's attempting to, and there's specificities that he states that are actually, I think, important and need to be part of the discussion of theism. Actually, he gets into that theists don't normally argue that there's a sentient being essentially at the beginning that like starts a process that unfolds, versus like they are intrinsically involved in every single, sculpting every single creature that comes into being. And I think that there's a way in which those two concepts are both not mutually exclusive, but yeah, I mean, it's inevitable that the universe comes from an initial condition that is highly constrained, and therefore the pattern in which that unfolds is very much inevitable in some ways. But that doesn't mean that there isn't choice included in the equation either, in all different levels. But the shape of a human being may not have had much of a choice in like what the shape of a human being or the properties of a human being had to be, but your life and the trajectory of it, there's a lot of choice involved, and who you were the circumstances you were born into were probably, there was a lot of choice involved, almost inevitably. But the soul is just another word for your sentience, your sense of self.
forced to admit that the universe is a mental construction because new physics is finally discovering that the observer shapes the reality.
Quantum scientists are now conducting measurable experiments, never before thought possible, to prove the theory. Consciousness creates reality.
So that's the story. Consciousness creates reality. There is no such thing as a physical world. Consciousness is all that exists. Now, this little hypothesis is all well and good if uttered between stoned philosophy undergrads at a party. But no, the quantum mystic insists that this notion is physics, that this deep truth is derived directly from empirical science. Well, it absolutely isn't, but that then begs the question, where did this lie come from? It's obvious that it's just a self-help sales pitch. It's quantum Tony Robbins.
Does conscious intention create reality? This question comes with a number of other questions. Does this mean we as individuals can shape and create whatever reality we'd like for ourselves? Does it mean we can manifest a certain lifestyle and attract certain experiences?
Manifest your desires with only 4 easy payments of $19.99. So again, if the notion of consciousness creating reality has nothing to do with quantum physics, how can these mystics claim as much? This is very easy to answer. All of this woo stems from deliberate misinterpretations of key experiments in 20th century physics. The most notable...
Okay, well, first of all, why is he... I don't understand why he's using words like deliberate. Always. It's always deliberate, and it's always an intentional lie, and a it's never just that somebody can be wrong. I want to know. That would be my main question for Dave Farina is, who is wrong about this? Who is a voice out there, but is not just a liar? They're just wrong. Who do you think is that? Because they surely exist, and it's and here's the irony is, I don't know if this, and I don't want to say this is, but it makes me wonder, is it intentional to call everybody intentional liars, or is it you just truly believe that everybody is an intentional liar? And I don't know, but I would hope that you truly believe it, because if you say something like that, then you should definitely believe it. But it also is kind of a nonsensical belief, I think. Most people can't live, like Deepak would not be able to make his entire life for decades and decades centered around just a complete lie, I don't think, about his beliefs. It just wouldn't, you would fall apart. People can't do that. That doesn't mean you can't keep up a lie, but you can't structure your entire life around it very much and have it be, and convince everybody else of it. And there's just like, you can maintain a lie, but you can't base everything on lying to yourself. You would just fall apart. At least I think you would eventually. I mean, I know you would eventually. It's just a matter of time. But this idea, though, that he's talking about of consciousness creating reality it's just not the right word to use, even though. But it's that consciousness or sentience is fundamental, and that our material our observations and experience with what we observe to be material would be emergent from mental structure, from a mental structure and a mental process. But that not a structure inside a brain, but a mind, which is different. Brain is a physical object, and a mind is not exactly, but it's responsible for the creation of physicality, of the observation of physicality. But to say that that there is no way to relate this into physics, there's a problem. Okay, let me break this down. Okay, the issue here is he says it's okay for people to express that consciousness is fundamental to physicalism, or sentience is fundamental to physicalism, if you're just a stoned philosophy student. So basically he's saying that it's okay to say it as long as you don't take it seriously. But then he says, but quantum mystics have to make it part of physics. And the thing is that, no, if philosophy has a point to it, it's to help us understand the real world. That's the point of philosophy. So, and if it turns out to be true, logically true, then it's likely also just, it's true in every way that it could be true. I don't want to say physically even, but yeah, it's like metaphysically true, which means like physicality comes from mentality. And if that's true, then it just is true. And you can't say that it's just you can't use the fact that it is an enticing idea and that it's used by a lot of people in this quote unquote woo crowd to be appealing when he's talking about, oh, can you manifest your reality? Can you, it looks like it's a clip from Deepok Chopra. Can you create the life that you have, that you want into being? And like I said, I don't actually agree with this being a good focus of us, because it's disregarding of the being that's responsible for all of this here, and who can literally will you into certain circumstances, much even if you don't want to be, and if they don't want you to be, then even if you try, you can't. So it's just disregarding of the hierarchy of reality, and so it's just a very and it's incomplete because the logical inevitability of that idea that consciousness is fundamental is that you're inside a consciousness that is sovereign and has power over you, or that you're subject to, I guess you could say. And so I understand the frustration of feeling like people are being taken advantage of when they say, when you see all this content, it's like, don't you want to manifest your reality? We're going to learn manifestation. You're going to manifest, what's that new car that you want? And it frustrates me too, but at the same time, if people believe it, then why do you care? Maybe it's truer, and I think it is truer than he thinks it is, but that doesn't mean that it's the complete story. I don't think it is. And I actually have more of a reason to dislike it, because I think that it's almost disrespectful to God. But you can't think it's disrespectful to God if you don't believe in a God. So I think that it's important to just, though you have to assume that people are being honest, and you can't just say it's an intentional misleading of people due to the intentional misunderstanding of the or misinterpretation of the double slit experiment. It might be an unintentional interpretation of the double slit experiment, but that doesn't even if they're misinterpreting the double slit experiment, that still doesn't mean that they are incorrect in their base assumptions about the nature of reality. And so I don't know, I think that Dave is
woo stem.
He's wrong about being so it's wrong to be so dismissive, I will say, of this stuff, just because it seems to lead to something that you find morally bad, which he clearly does.
From deliberate misinterpretations of key experiments in 20th century physics. Empirical science. Well, it absolutely isn't, but that then begs the question uttered between stoned philosophy undergrads at a party. But no, the quantum mystic insists that this notion is physics, that this deep truth is derived directly from empirical science. Well, it absolutely isn't, but that then begs the question, where did this lie come from?
See, again, it's a lie. It's like, why is everything a lie to this guy? It can't just be where did this misinterpretation come from? And I'm not saying if you want to call it a lie, it's possible that it is, you could call it a lie. It's of the Satan or something, if you're going to be but he would not believe in that. So that means that he's basically assuming that every single person that gets it wrong, who has a following of any kind, or who repeats this stuff to anyone, is lying instead of just being wrong. That's just it's just such a nonsensical belief, I think. If you're going to take it to a macro scale and you're going to talk about like this being lies from, a greater entity like Satan or something, then we can have a different conversation. But like, if you don't believe in that and you just think every single one of these people is just lying, then any time that this idea is promoted, it's a lie. Then I think that's it's undermining of the term. It really is. Like a lot, we have to, being wrong and being lying and being wrong have to be two different things, or else we're gonna have problems with any kind of judgment. But here's the other thing: is like, it's if you can't connect the idea that consciousness is fundamental or sentience is fundamental to physical experience, then to physics, then you cannot. Then it's not okay, actually, for like stoned philosophy undergrads to be talking about it, because everything has to eventually be connected. You can't just it can't be okay in this context but not okay in this context. And I get what he's doing, and to some degree the entire setup is just to be dismissive, but in reality, like, it's leading to logical inconsistencies that that if you're gonna take this seriously have to be rigorously worked out. You either take this seriously or you don't. You can't say, I am a science communicator, I take science seriously, but also let me turn this into a gigantic joke. And no, if you're serious, take it seriously. That doesn't mean that you can't make a joke, but it does mean that you have to be honest and as impeccable with your word as you can, and assume that those who you are communicating with are being honest, or else you should not be communicating with them. It is a waste of your time. And everyone else who's watching you, it's like you're and if they're wrong and you're trying to expose the fact that they're wrong, you're not doing it as effectively as you could, because if you didn't just make the claim that everything that they're doing is just because they're being dishonest and they're malicious, then you would be able to actually, like, people would be able to focus on the logic of your arguments more, but they don't. They just look at, oh, he's saying that they're liars. And it took me a long time to like see past that, even though and look at the logic of the argument. But it takes a long time to get there in a lot of these, because it's just like this undermining and dismissive, and which doesn't make sense because you're also focusing on it, and I guess almost slanderous way of apparently slanderous. I don't want to say slanderous because I don't know. Maybe he really believes that all these people are lying. But if he does, like, Dave, if you ever watch this, like, I hope you think about how unlikely that is, that all these people are just liars. But I wonder what it means to someone who is drawn to the obscure. I think anyone here is probably drawn to the obscure to some degree. I was thinking that as well. Though him... I think actually that's not so true. I think that people on my channel are not so drawn to the obscure necessarily. I think they might initially be, but I think that if you're here on this channel, then I think that you're focusing on this instead of some other, some other content that's focused on similar concepts. I think that you're not so drawn to the obscure. I think you're searching beyond to get past the obscure, because I just think that my goals are to be as specific and clear with my words as possible. And granted, that's also a process, and sometimes I don't do the best job at that. But I do think that often I do a better job than many others, and That's just me being honest. I'm not trying to, be an asshole. But if I didn't think that, then why would I be talking about it? Like, that would be if I, or at least I should be pointing you to other people. Though through him all things were made, without him nothing was made that has been made. John 1:3. Yes, that is, I agree with that statement, but that doesn't, I don't know if I would agree with how you interpret that statement, but I definitely think that statement has truth in it, and the way that I interpret it has truth in it. But, I believe scripture of the Abrahamic traditions, all three of them. Professor Dave is a material girl. Tech Padawan, okay, wait. Dave is never going to watch this. Maybe not. You never know. He might make a video about it, but not watch. That's fine. What's so damning is that when you have a paranormal experience on your own, you're simply delusional. But when multiple people experience the same thing at once, they are oddly silent. I found, yeah, because they can't address it. Like, they just ignore it. And but the thing is that they can't really. It's hard for them to. They have to believe all of you at once, and that something happened that's not fit with their firsthand experience ever, and that's a tough place to be. You either do that or you don't do that. Neither one is wrong, but like, you have to pick one. Again, here we go.
Means absolutely nothing if you don't do any math. There is nothing in physics that lends any credibility to the notion that the universe is immaterial or some kind of mental construct. One can engage in such philosophical speculation if they choose, and it's not a totally meritless intellectual exercise. But to say that such ideas have some kind of empirical basis in physics is objectively false. Anyone who says anything of the sort either doesn't understand physics or is lying, or both. And of course, there is the word quantum itself. It is a...
But I will say that that's just not necessarily true at all. There's absolutely evidence that supports that the existence is fundamentally a mental structure. And also, not even just that, but if there's a logical argument that is irrefutable, and I challenge Dave or anyone else to refute the logic of the argument that I put forth in my Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide. The truest thing that you know to exist is a sentient being. Like, that means reality as you know it, more truly than anything else that you know about it, is that it is fundamentally sentient.
A more boring word than many people presume. Quantum simply refers to the minimum amount of any physical entity involved in an interaction. So, for example, photons are quanta. A photon is the smallest amount of light there can be. This idea of quantization tells us that physical properties consist strictly of integer multiples of some tiniest indivisible subunit. So there is a tiniest quantity possible for energy, space, and time, and all values are multiples of that unbelievably tiny subunit. Quantization is a core principle of quantum mechanics, and that's what this word refers to. It does not refer to lasers or interdimensional travel or whatever other unadulterated fantasy the mystic seeks to infuse it with. So apart from the self-help snake oil, Curtis...
First of all, lasers and interdimensional travel, no. That's, who said that? But does that mean that quantization of sentience is a logical application of the word quantum? If you are a single individual sentient being, your sense of self is you, Dave, and that's an irreducible being, then doesn't it make sense to apply the word quantum when talking about the interactions between and relationships between sentient beings? If cells are each individuated sentiences, and you are an individuated sentience on top of those cells, doesn't this mean that you can apply this term very naturally, quantum, to this context? Yes, absolutely. This is why people use it in this space of the consciousness space and the quote unquote woo crowd, but it's really the consciousness crowd, the spirituality crowd, the spiritual crowd, which the spirit is just another word for the soul, which is just another word for the self, which is another word for consciousness or sentience. They're all the same thing. What else would they be? Like, what is the soul, the definition of this soul that is just magical nonsense that doesn't exist, apparently? No. It's just the self. So, to lose your soul is to lose yourself. That's what it means. It doesn't mean anything more complicated than that. Part of this is just like the way that we grow up is the language is confused, but a soul is self, and is a self, and a self is a consciousness, and they are individuated, in structures. That's what the consciousnesses are. A being is an individual. It's literally, that's what we call ourselves. I am an individual. Okay? Isn't that basically what Dave just described quantum to be? Is an individual, indivisible subunit. Okay. Are you divisible? I'm not talking about your body. I'm talking about you. You're not divisible. I'm not divisible. That's just it's a property of a sentient being. This is part of why I argue that it seems like a planaria worm is not actually a sentient being. It's an assembly of cells that acts like a sentient being, but it's really like a corporation. That's why I call it a corporism, because when you cut it in half, and you cut it into fourths, you cut it into tenths, and you cut it into 50ths, it still just makes a bunch of new ones. And it seems to keep the memories, but it's really that it stores information. Just like if you cut Coca-Cola company, the corporation, in half, the things that they discovered in R&D are going to be known to multiple people, and then they're going to go, each of the two new companies that's formed from the original one is going to both have the information that is left over from the previous single corporation that they were, divided from. So, but that, like, it makes perfect sense to use the term quantum when talking about consciousness. I shied away from it for a while, and I've slowly been like realizing it's just unavoidable. And that it's not that I'm taking the word of the quantum physicists. No, they took that word from English. It existed, and it meant multiples of some tiniest individual subunits. It means quantities. That's it. It doesn't just apply to some specific, rigorous, and isolated and singular definition that is associated with the standard model. It's just nonsense. Okay, I've got to go soon, so I think that's probably a good place to leave it. He gets into just criticizing Leo Gura, and I'm not going to get... I don't think that it's useful for me to get into that too much, to be quite honest. But, I'm not... I don't want to get into him criticizing specific people. I have my disagreements. I did multiple very long streams on Leo Gura, and I agree with a lot of what he has to say, and I disagree with some of the things that he says, and or how he says some of the things that he says. But you can watch that specifically. You don't have to watch me, do this game of telephone where I'm criticizing somebody who else is criticizing, Leo Gura in this way. But and it doesn't matter much because all of my criticism of the things that Dave has done in this and continues to do, I've listed in here, which is the assumption that everybody is just disingenuous, malicious liar. I don't engage with malicious people who I think are malicious for the most part. I try not to, but I also assume that people usually are not trying to be malicious with this type of stuff, and I think it makes sense to assume that. But it's not universal, but I think that it's it's interesting. Here, let me see this actually. Actually really liked his criticism of the kind of the simplistic creationism arguments that he had been hearing, and I thought that he was giving honest acknowledgement of the fact that there was a way in which that creationism made sense, but if it wasn't it was had a more deterministic aspect to it, but which I actually agree with. But this was his discussion with Brian Keating, and I'm trying to see if I can find
channel, one of which being just sort of academic tutorials on a
probably heard this joke. Like a scientist says,
and Brahe and the painstaking accumulation of data and mathematical analysis, and no, I don't think we can, in terms of where we are lacking now, obviously I cannot know. However, it is an important thing to understand, because this is an argument that a lot of science deniers will put forward to go, well, science is wrong all the time, so all the science we know right now is wrong. So
like a science denier. Like, what is a science denier? It just means it's become a religion in a way, but it's like dogmatic.
It's never that the existing paradigm is discarded. It's always just it's about people who lie about science, and that's creationists or intelligent design proponents. That's Eric Lerner in the Electric Universe and the Wall Thornhills and all those people. That's anti-vaxxers. It's anybody, right? I don't just go after creationists, although that is a big chunk of my debunking, just because of how strongly they've tried to character assassinate me as a result. But it's just science lies. That's it.
And I did confront James in that video. As you know, I did talk to him about the kind of undermining of any position when ad hominem attacks are brought in. And I'll refer, and I'll put links to the video debate where you did finally debate with him in person. I believe you went to...
I don't know how much, like at what point he gets into it, and I don't have the time. But there is... I highly recommend watching that. It's on Dave's channel as well. It's with Brian Keating, who, we've spoken about before, and I've worked with in the past, and I have, quite a bit of respect for Brian as a scientist and as somebody who's brave and willing to have discussions with people that other people in academia would not engage with. And I think that that's one of the most important qualities in a scientist is bravery and humility. And I think that Brian tends to be quite brave and humble. So I highly recommend watching that. And, maybe they get into the details of Dave's perspective on there. But like I said, if I thought that Dave did not have or something of value to add to this discussion, I would not be discussing his channel. I recommend that you subscribe, actually. There's so much that you can learn from that channel. There's stuff I can learn from that channel. Even if we disagree about the fundamentals, there are just, observations that have been recorded that he can, present and that are there in an organized fashion. So, but yeah, I definitely do have my disagreements with some fundamental assumptions, and just also the way in which we go about this stuff. And that's kind of what I wanted to highlight more than anything tonight, is not the fact that I disagree with him about the fundamental nature of reality, but it is about the importance of how we are communicating in these discussions. And there is a logical way of doing so. And there is a logical way in terms of your personal assumptions, and a logical way in terms of the types of language that we use and the words that we use and how we use them, and what words we should not use when describing the fundamental, but like life, or non-existent, or magic, but also when it comes to being logical in our exchange with people, it's important to assume that they are being honest if you're going to have an exchange with them, unless they've proven that they've lied, and in which case, I don't know, you find out that they told somebody something about like their interaction with you that was not true, and then you can defend yourself, but that's a specific circumstance. It's not totalizing, and it has its limit to just that specific circumstance. So but that stuff isn't just about like doing the right thing. It's also it's not just about doing that which is good. It's about doing that which is true. There is a logical way of going about engaging with people, and that includes assuming that people that you engage with are being honest with you and with others. And if you don't believe that, then just don't engage. It just does not make sense. It adds to an incoherent, self-defeating string of information, essentially, that we call a discussion, but it is not a useful one. It's a waste of everybody's time. So with that, let me get to the chat and then I'll go. The double slit experiment. You never know. Sometimes they blame it on the community wanting to drum up tourism. I don't know what you mean by that, but only if you possess the key to the safe that holds the secret Coca-Cola formula. Yes, that's true. But, it's there's still information that is saved in different organizations. It's like, what was it? It was Mountain Hardware and like split off from North Face as a company, I remember. And like, they make the same things. And it's like, obviously the information that was gained while working at North Face went and transferred over to the company Mountain Hardware too. He seems, at least here, more of a practitioner of scientism than science, it seems. Yeah, I think that I understand what you're saying, and I don't disagree with that. I think that it's important to also have the discussion of what is science. And I would argue that science is a method and a language. And that's really it. I mean, and it may be a goal. It's like a pursuit. You could say science is not... We kind of associate with science with meaning the truth. That's science. That's true. It's like, no, science is the pursuit of truth. It's the goal of truth, but it's not the actual truth. It's the act of pursuing the goal of truth through a specific communication, which is language, and a specific method, which is, experimentation and observation. But we've removed observation from it completely, and we need to make sure that that's reincorporated. Which will also mean that, it's going to expand the realm of which science, of what is incorporated within science. But it doesn't really, it just expands it beyond this arbitrary kind of isolation that it has been recently, within the last 100 years, put within. But science has existed since the beginning of civilization. It's not, and since probably before that, it's not something that is a new phenomenon. Even though people like to say that, it's like, well, we had the scientific revolution and we had the the Enlightenment and all these periods in which all of a sudden we went from not being a thinking people to being a thinking people. And it's like, how do you think we even got anywhere? By thinking. So how do we think we discovered anything? bricks and fire and cooking and farming and domestication and all kinds of things. It's like, how is that not part of the scientific pursuit, I guess? It's a tough thing to define, but it does have multiple meanings at once. But if I had one, I would say it's the pursuit of truth. And instead of, without relying on like revelation necessarily, or not solely on revelation. It'd be like you would have to discover the pursuit of truth through discovery instead of the pursuit of truth through revelation, which would be two different methods of getting to the truth, but both actually valid. Off a topic, but do you change how you take care of your rubber boas this time of year? No, I don't. That is an off-topic question. I have some snakes. I keep reptiles, for those of you that don't know, but most of you probably do know. And some of those require very cold temperatures in order to like successfully reproduce. And I have never lived in a place that really lets. That's not true. I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona, but I think that I don't get those animals usually cold enough to reproduce. They're doing fine. They do fine, but you need to get them very cold. Some people put them in like the refrigerator, but my wife won't let me, so I need to get like a small fridge or something like that. But yeah, just to he's talking. Torin in the chat is asking about how do you hibernate your animals in the winter, and I don't normally, but some people do by putting them in the refrigerator if you don't live somewhere cold. I think if a science communicator doesn't make a conscious effort otherwise, they may end up as a practitioner of scientism by default. I agree with that. But I don't even know if I like the term scientism, but I totally think it's useful right here because obviously you and I understand what it's meant by it. But if somebody else doesn't understand what's meant by it, then it's not very helpful. But it's just dogma. But like even that has multiple meanings. There's a good meaning to dogma of people who study certain theological traditions. They're like, that's dogma. Dogma meaning like that's the standard understanding. Or practice, but then there's dogma as in like blind acceptance without questioning. But anyways, with that, please hit the like button. I hope you found this valuable. Please share it with anybody that you think would enjoy it. If you would like to join our Discord community, please send me a private message on Instagram and I will send you the link. It's a really good group of people, and there's different channels in there for all different topics. And if you'd like to join my Patreon and support this project monetarily, the link is below. There's also a link to my Instagram page for this project, my personal Instagram page, my Twitter, and links to a video overview of this project as well. But with that, thank you, and till next week. Peace.